Well, hello there. I know it's been a while since I put out a generator video, but this video spans a pretty long period of time. You'll be able to tell by the fact that there's snow on the ground in the beginning of the video, and by the end I'm sweating my balls off. But please, don't get too excited, because even though this video took months to make, I really felt like I didn't make that much progress. Alright, anyway, first things first, I broke out the old Ford and started stripping the topsoil in the area where I'm going to build the structure. I also got rid of this pesky stump that I found because I knew in the future it would be in my way. Now please remember, if you're an excavation guy or a concrete guy or a surveyor or any self-respecting contractor, you might want to look away for some of this because I didn't do a whole lot of research. I am only a professional in one field and it is not this. So pretty much everything I do is based on the little bit of common sense I have or whatever I've seen other people do, which may or may not be right. So that's your official trigger warning. Anyway, once I got the topsoil stripped, I marked out the structure. It's going to be somewhere around 12 by 24, maybe a little less or a little more. I'm not going super accurate. And then I started digging the holes for my footers. I am putting the footers 24 inches below grade because that is where the frost line is in my area. I actually ended up going a little bit deeper, but got them down low enough that we shouldn't have any issue with frost because that's what I hear you're supposed to do. I did get the footers pretty level, pretty square, but not quite square enough. When I started framing them up, I did find out that I had to dig some more out by hand because I'm dumb. There's going to be a lot of that in this video. There's a lot of me digging, even though I have an excavator.
I'm not a smart man.
So, that's how you know I don't know what I'm doing. I framed up these footers a foot wide, and I used 2x6s, so they'll be just under 6 inches thick. And that is based on, once again, absolutely nothing. That felt like it'd be enough. That's how engineers do it, right? By feel? Yeah, I'm sure I'll be fine. I got 2 pieces of 1/2 inch rebar all the way around, chaired up, and I'm using number 4 copper for my footer ground. I do have it tied to the rebar with some copper goop and a good old acorn nut. I actually have it sticking out in 2 different places. I had the idea of bringing the ground up inside the generator, like inside the generator frame for that ground, and then another one for the sub panel, but that all kind of changed. For the concrete, I did invest in one of these mud mixers. They are not paying me to use this. I just went and bought one. They are not cheap, but I can tell you after using one for many, many, many bags of concrete, it's pretty slick. I mean, any issues I had were pretty much my fault. The thing just chugs along and pours concrete as fast as you can load it, pretty much. I did recruit the help of some other people for the concrete portions of this project because you really need one person loading the mixer and at least one other person spreading the concrete out. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, that's a lot of concrete, why didn't you just order a truck? I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. I was thinking that pretty early on into this project, but after having already ordered 300 bags of concrete and the mixer, I was pretty well committed, but I did regret doing the concrete myself. I should have hired professionals. It would have been done 1,000 times faster. We would have been on to part 100 of this series by now, and the concrete would have been done much better. In the end, I did end up saving money by doing it all myself, even after buying the mixer, and obviously I get to keep the mixer when it's done, so that's cool. But I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't do this quantity of concrete again because I'm not a concrete guy, and it's really not what that mixer is for. It's meant for smaller jobs, and I pushed it to the limit. So yeah, if you're following along at home, just hire a company. It's going to be a lot easier. Once I got the footers poured, I did end up covering them in plastic because it got very cold that night, but they seemed to cure pretty well. I stripped the forms, cleaned everything off. I did stick a few pieces of rebar in to tie into the walls. I should have done more looking back. I don't know. I didn't know any better, but at least there's something. Another thing I came to regret during this whole process was building all the forms myself. Not so much for the footers, that wasn't a big deal, but I should have rented forms for the walls. That ended up using a lot of lumber and a lot of time and making a huge mess. And of course, you can't really do much with the wood afterwards because it gets destroyed. So I should have rented forms. All right, now I can start laying out the walls. I am going to drop down for the door to the structure. This is going to be a double door, so it's pretty good size opening there. And I'm also going to drop down for the air intake of the generator because I think it'll look a lot better. I don't know what kind of louvers I'm going to use or whatever, but at least it's ready to go for that. Then I went around and straightened all my rebar uprights, lengthened them to where they needed to go. I also bent the rebar on the old hook of the backhoe. I didn't have any kind of rebar bender, but this worked pretty well. At least I actually bent the rebar around the corners. Seems like the thing you're supposed to do. Now, of course, because I am not a concrete guy, that means I am also not a rebar guy. And looking back, I think I kind of skimped on the rebar. I probably should have used more vertical pieces. I had 3 rows horizontal. It's all 1/2-inch rebar. The only saving grace is all the force is pretty much straight down on this structure. It's not a basement, so the dirt is even on both sides, and all the weight should just be pressing down. Hopefully it'll be fine. We'll find out. Maybe it'll fall over. Who knows? I also went full Harry Homeowner on the rebar ties. I bought the little pre-made ones, but I actually ended up switching back to the regular roll of tie wire because those things were so thin. They kept snapping, and also I'm not that good at it. But the regular roll of tie wire, I could get it much thicker, and it actually worked out a lot better. Once that was done, I was able to start forming up my walls. Now, this is another thing that I had some growing pains on. I got weird with the framing to begin with, and then I learned that the easiest thing is just to build reinforced boxes and put those boxes together. So I did end up doing that near the end and for the whole second half, but at the very beginning, I was wasting a lot of time. I did have to get a little creative to pour the walls. I needed the mixer to be high enough to where the concrete would actually flow down into the forms. So I put the mixer in the back of the old pickup truck, and then I picked up all of the concrete with the backhoe. Thankfully, I bought forks for it, so it made that easier. And I just loaded the mixer from the back of the truck. So that all worked out pretty good. I also bought a cheap vibrator to get all the air out. So yeah, definitely not professional, but I'd say I did a little better than the average Harry homeowner. Once the concrete was setting up, I installed my anchors. They're just those L-shaped bolts, 1/2-inch galvanized anchors. So there's that half of the wall poured, and there it is stripped. I'll probably show more of that process on the second half, but that's what we got to move on to, the second half. Here is the massive mess I managed to make just from this part of the project. I saved the forms, like I said, for the other part of the wall. But I learned a lot from doing that first half, and the first thing I learned was that my forms weren't strong enough. I am using all 5/8 plywood and 2x6s for the studs, for lack of a better term. I don't know what they're called. But anyway, I did double the amount of 2x6s I used. I also doubled the amount of screws that I used to hold everything together. Now, I know a lot of people use nails for forms, but I don't know any better, so I just used deck screws, which were, of course, a nightmare to get out. I know they make special screws for forms, but I didn't buy them, so it is what it is. So on the second round, I did add a lot more lumber, a lot more screws. Now, obviously, the first wall was not a total failure because you saw it completed, but the forms were bulging a lot more than I wanted them to. It was making me very nervous. The bottoms were trying to push out, even though I had stakes around the bottoms. There just wasn't enough bracing. There wasn't enough strength. And it was making me very nervous because that would have ruined my day if I had wasted that much concrete from a form bursting. So on the second go round, I made it a lot sturdier. To fix the issue with the bottoms kicking out, I decided to actually tap-con the forms to the footer, which I'm sure is not normal. I know I'm probably technically compromising the structural integrity of my footer by drilling holes in it, but my forms didn't kick out, I can tell you that. Here I am drilling the holes for those tap-cons. My brother had a big box of these tap-cons laying around, so it's the only reason I used Phillips head tap-cons. But to give myself some tiny chance of getting them back out, I did fill each head with a little bit of duct seal because I didn't feel like chipping concrete out of those as well as all my stupid deck screws. Now, in the first go round, I did use all thread to hold the forms together in the center part of the forms. I know they make special metal tabs for this that, like, you put wedges on each side, then you break them off at the end. I don't know what they're called. I decided to use stainless steel all thread because I wanted to be special and I didn't want anything rusting after the fact. So I also doubled the amount of all thread that I used. I used bigger washers and I used twice as much to keep the forms together and keep them from pillowing or whatever you call it. I also decided to stick the year in the concrete like I'm building a bridge or something, but you know, why not? Give it a shot. All I could find were house numbers to do that with, but you'll see how that went. And just like that, we're pouring again. Here is the second half of the wall. There is the concrete being vibrated. You can see how it flows right around that corner when you stick that in there. And once it was done, pull all the tap-cons out. You can also see that the duct seal did its job. I would definitely recommend that if you're forced to use the wrong screw. And here I am stripping the forms. I didn't really get much footage of that on the first go round. I didn't use any form release whatsoever, as you can probably tell by my struggle. I should have used WD-40 or diesel or something, but it really wasn't too bad. Also, yes, I think you're supposed to wear tennis shoes while you do this. They're OSHA approved for concrete work. Luckily, I had plenty of sacrificial boards to use as wedges when the forms were giving me trouble. I did learn to not use a pry bar because you'll probably crack the corner of your concrete, so I tried to use wood whenever possible because it didn't have that problem. Here I am getting my little date mold form thing out. That didn't go very well. I probably should have let the concrete cure some more before I attempted this. Also, the house numbers, because the back of them was hollow, they kind of took the concrete with them. Didn't look great. I'm going to try to clean that up in the future with a chisel and maybe a Dremel tool. I'll get it looking good one way or another. And speaking of looking good, there is the footer and walls finished. I did backfill around the outside and the inside, compacting as I went to minimize settling. Luckily, the whole center is still virgin ground, so that shouldn't settle. And I left this void in the concrete so that we can think about getting our conduits over to the house. Look at that pretty blue junction box. Isn't that thing beautiful? Alright, so obviously we gotta dig a massive hole, but unfortunately my septic system has a pipe running right through where I have to go, because that's the pipe that goes to the splitter box, which is right there, and then ultimately the drain field. So first things first, we gotta dig that thing up. And preferably not on accident with the backhoe. I see enough poop day to day. I don't need to work with it today. There she is, hiding down there. This thing was bedded in pretty large gravel, so that was kind of a pain in the butt, but now we can break out the big guns. I'll never forget when I bought this backhoe 10 years ago or so. The guy I bought it from said, once you have this, a shovel won't fit your hand anymore. And he was right. Except I still seem to have this mental block where I think, oh, I'll just dig out that little bit by hand. Not realizing that one scoop of the backhoe is, half an hour of digging, so I still end up using a shovel way more than I should. Once I dug enough of a trench for myself to work in, I was able to expose this void that I left in the bottom of the wall, and this of course will be where all my conduits come up, and I did it so that they would come up inside the structure. I thought that would look a lot cleaner. Now obviously, if I was really good at this, I would have all the conduits inside the original form, and I would have just poured around them, but I'm not that good at this, so I decided to do it this way, because it gave me a lot more leeway to get the conduits to where they needed to go, and I didn't have to be as good with the form work. So now I can start running some pipe. Look at that, 12 minutes in, and we're finally doing some electrical work on this electrical channel. I am just going to be using regular old Schedule 40 PVC. I know I'm a wuss. I should have bought Schedule 80 or Rob Roy or Rigid, but I mean, at the end of the day, this is a house. Also, I'm not a fan of using any kind of metallic conduit underground unless it's actual stainless steel, because it will rot away. I mean, it just will. Also, this is a pretty short run, so I'm not using any kind of rigid 90s to keep the wire from pulling through the 90 while I'm pulling it. We're not using a tugger here. We're pushing and pulling by hand. It shouldn't be a problem. I would have used sweeping 90s, but I couldn't get them in time. I'll just be honest on that one. But even so, the pipes are oversized. They're not going to be filled to the max. It won't be an issue. That'll be a good clip to cut to when I get the wires stuck and I'm trying to pull it with a truck. So here's the deal with the conduits. From left to right, we have a 1-inch conduit on the left, which will be for any sort of data or low voltage, Cat 6, fiber, whatever it is. Then we have two 2-inch conduits. One is for the main generator power circuit. The other one is a spare, which I'm sure will be used in the future for something else, maybe solar or something. Then we have 3 1-inch pipes. One of them is to feed a sub panel in the structure. The other 2 are for PLC IO, at least for now. That may change if I decide to put a PLC out here too. And then that last 2-inch pipe on the right is going to be for a water line. I'm probably just going to pull PEX through that. I should have definitely used sweeping 90s on that, but once again, I couldn't get them in time, so I just used 2 45s like a total hack.
Look at that hack job!
I also filled my void with concrete once I was done with the pipes, just to get my structural integrity back and keep them from moving. There's that septic pipe fully exposed. Now we don't have to worry about messing that up. And there's our trench done all the way to our junction box. One thing I will say about trenching, if you're new to this, is that if you have time, it pays to clean up your trench. Now I know, usually in construction, you don't have time, and your foreman's going to be screaming at you if you do any of this, but if you have soil that's full of roots like this, it pays to go through with a pair of hedge clippers and just get them all out of the way. It keeps you from having dirt falling down your crack the whole time. I also like to give the bottom of the trench a quick rake just to kind of even it all out, and part of that is it it makes it easier to work in, but also you want it nice and even for your conduits to sit on so that they don't settle too much. You don't want a bunch of voids or gaps. You want the conduits to mostly be sitting flat. You also want to bed your conduits in sand, but where I live, it is all sand. I mean, this stuff is basically straight out of the sandbox. As you can see, I did have to bend my conduits around this little curve in my trench, and I didn't use a hot box for this. I actually just left the conduits out in the sun for a few hours because it's a pretty long sweep of a curve, so that worked out pretty well. They still had a little bit of rigidity to them. That's why I got these stakes out to hold them in place. But all in all, I think it turned out pretty good. If anyone's wondering why I didn't just dig the trench in a straight line, it's because there was a pretty good size, well, pretty good looking beech tree in the way, and I didn't want to cut it down just for this. I don't know. I like that tree, so I decided to kind of go around it. Hopefully the roots don't end up being an issue. Another tip I'll give the new guys is when you're doing a whole bunch of conduit, especially large conduit, and you're gluing them all together, make sure when you push the conduit in, you hold them for a few seconds. If you just jam the conduits together and let go, they will shoot apart. You need to push it in all the way, twist it gently until you feel resistance, and then you're probably good to go. But if you don't, they will slide right apart. It's kind of strange. Thankfully, as you can see, I can get pretty sloppy with the glue since this is all underground. Even my OCD doesn't care how this looks because it'll be about 2.5 feet underground. So I do have clear glue for this part of the process, but you'll see later that my gluing skills are not where they should be. I'm definitely not allowed around any purple primer. So there's the bulk of my conduits all run in my little duct bank. Now all that's left to do is to chair them up and pour concrete. I'm kidding. I'm not doing that. I thought about it, though. Even for me, that might have been a little bit too industrial, and it would have also made it very hard to maintain. And speaking of industrial maintenance, I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Traction. Traction has worked with over 1,500 manufacturers within the US and globally to reduce downtime and increase reliability. It doesn't matter if you work in a mill or a mine, you produce chemicals, or you produce food, they can help you manage and monitor your assets. With Traction's Smart Track sensors, you aren't just throwing a one-size-fits-all product at your equipment and hoping for the best. Each sensor takes in real-time data to determine what your specific machine's normal and abnormal behavior looks like. It takes all the guesswork out of monitoring the health of your assets and lets you take action long before your facility comes to a grinding halt. So check out Traction in the description below. Alright, let's get back to work. Now that the conduits are mostly run the whole way, I'm actually going to go ahead and start backfilling. I would have finished them completely, but this is where my dog goes out at night, so I wanted to get the pipes run and backfilled in one day. That way she doesn't fall in a trench. You really don't want to leave the trench open for too long, not just because of my dog, but also because if it rains, it becomes a total mess, so you want to get it backfilled as soon as possible. As you can see, I'm only backfilling about halfway with the backhoe and using it to compact down. Really, you should probably, do a foot at a time and use an actual compactor, but I'm using what I got. And I'm also raking this out too, because once again, it just makes it easier to work with. And now that the trench is halfway filled, we can put down some buried electric tape. I managed to find just about the largest tape in the world, apparently. And I think I did a pretty thorough job. If you dig, you will definitely hit this, and hopefully you'll stop. So that's another reason you only backfill halfway, because you don't want to put this right on top of the pipe, because then you're just going to put a shovel through the pipe. This gives you a little leeway before you make bad decisions. Just in case any of you code guys were wondering, I am aware that the conduits do not need to be this deep underground per code. There's a couple reasons I did that. One reason is that that's how deep they come in the structure itself. They're already 2 foot down to get into that void that I created, so I just kind of kept it that way. The other reason is, since I'm running a water line, it might help with that not freezing. I do plan to purge it in the winter, but just in case I forget or I decide I want to keep the water on, it might actually not freeze being that deep. And then the last reason is I'm using a machine, so it's way too easy to get carried away and just go deeper than you need to. Alright, now before I run my electrical conduits into my beautiful junction box, I do want to get the hole for the water line drilled through the foundation. Unfortunately, I did not have a long enough and small enough pilot bit to match what comes with this carbide hole saw, so I ended up drilling part of the hole first, then doing the pilot bit. That way the bit was already kind of started and in place. And then I tried drilling from both sides, but I didn't do enough, so I still had a pretty good blowout. Also, if you're using these carbide hole saw things, these kind of fake core drills, I recommend using a smaller bit and busting out as much as you can. I went around the whole perimeter with the smaller bit because it was taking absolutely forever to drill this hole. I'm also using a fairly small drill, but yeah, it does make it a lot faster if you drill a bunch of holes around the perimeter. Now, I know you might be thinking, hey, in the last episode, you said you didn't want to drill through the foundation. Well, that was for all the electrical conduits. I didn't want 100 holes through the foundation, but I am going to make an exception for the water line. Here I am setting all my expansion joints. You can see they have that little mark for the halfway line, and usually you set them halfway when you first install them. Now, that's more for like going down the side of a building or something so they can expand and contract, but in this case, most likely they're just going to expand. So I probably could have started with them a little further in. But if it settles more than, 5 inches, then I got other issues. I'll probably dig it back up and compact it better because that's way too much. Also, what people don't seem to understand about expansion joints is they're only as good as the slack you have in the wire. If they expand too much, you're going to start pulling way too hard on that wire. Now, as you can see, I absolutely butchered the glue on these expansion joints. Of course, the thing that's above ground, I do the worst job on. I didn't realize that I had bought gray glue. I always buy clear to hide my mistakes, but it's nothing a little bit of acetone won't solve. It still isn't perfect, but it looks a lot better after I wiped it down. I was a little torn about using PVC coming out of the ground because it doesn't hold up to the sun, but thankfully this part of the house barely gets any sun, so we will see how that does. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd use stainless rigid or something, or Rob Roy, but even I have a budget at a certain point, so hopefully it does all right. Or I'll just replace it all, who knows? Here is my pipe coming in the basement. I did patch that up on both sides as best as I could. So I don't think I'll have an issue with water there. I don't have issues with water to begin with, so we'll see. So that's the conduits all finished for now. Trench is backfilled. It needs to be graded, but I may actually hire someone to do that with topsoil and everything because I'm not very good at grading. But for now, it is good to go. Here I am compacting the inside of the structure after I got it all level. I didn't have my actual compactor yet, so I did it by hand. But thankfully, like I said earlier, most of the inside of the structure is virgin ground, so it shouldn't settle much at all. I did decide to use crushed concrete for the base of my floor because I heard it compacts down pretty well, and also it's dirt cheap. So, I am using about 4 to 6 inches of crushed concrete underneath my regular concrete. But I will warn you, if you didn't already know, crushed concrete is a very dirty product. You got to go through it and get big chunks out and all sorts of junk. Sometimes there's sticks in it. It's very messy. Unfortunately, I don't have like an actual grading laser, or whatever it's called, the thing that surveyors use, but I did use my regular laser when it was dark to get a good level line all the way around the outside that I could measure to, and then I rented an actual compactor to compact the concrete down, get it all nice and level and flat. Went around it a bunch of times. I mean, this stuff basically became concrete. It did compact very well. Once that was done, I did put down a membrane. Now, once again, if you're a concrete guy, just please ignore me. Please look away because this isn't even the right membrane. This is just what I found. This is just regular, I think 6mm plastic, and I double layered it, which I'm probably also not supposed to do. But I do have a membrane of some sort at least. And then in terms of the outside, like an expansion joint, I couldn't find that either. So I ended up using Sill Seal, which I know is not the right thing, but at least there's something there. I did 1/2-inch rebar again on an 18-inch grid this time. I left a specific empty spot for bolting down the generator shock absorbers. I actually measured all that out, so hopefully that will not give me trouble in the future. I did just use regular concrete blocks as rebar chairs. I couldn't find the fancy little plastic ones, so they're still in there. I didn't take them out. I know that's a void in the concrete, and you're supposed to take them out and then lift the rebar up. I left them, so hopefully it will be strong enough. This pad is just under 6 inches thick with 1/2-inch rebar, so I'm hoping, it'll hold me. Also, in terms of finishing the concrete, I am obviously no expert, but I do plan to epoxy coat this floor, so I'm thinking it's probably not a huge deal to make this perfect. Plus, I am incapable of making it perfect. It is pretty level though, so at least I have that going for me. You can probably see that I actually formed up around the electrical conduits, and I did that so that if the main pad settles, it doesn't break the electrical conduits apart underground because they're actually sitting on the footer. So I'm going to do that in a separate little pour. I also need to do a separate little pour for my ramp coming up into my structure, but that's the foundation finished. I know it doesn't seem like I accomplished a whole lot for 3 months, but I am doing this as a weekend warrior. Also, that's about 500 bags of concrete, so I clearly did something. Big thanks to Traction for sponsoring this video, and I will see you on the next one.